So as there has been an update on the UK's furlough scheme, we wanted to give you an update on what those changes are and what they mean for you. So the current furlough scheme actually started on March 20th, 2020, but was backdated to February the 28th. It was originally meant to end on June the 30th, but it has now been extended until October the 31st. So whilst the extension itself hasn't exactly been unexpected, a couple of things that have come with that extension have come as a bit of a surprise. The first surprise is the length of the extension itself. With everything so far, it has been done in basically 3-week blocks. So to have an announcement in what is the middle of May that the extension is going to be taking place until the 31st of October has come as a surprise to many people. The second surprise is that the 80% of salary that people would receive whilst on furlough is not going to be reduced. Many circles had even suggested that this furlough decrease would happen immediately, but in actual fact it's not happening at all. It will be 80% right up until the end of the furlough scheme on the 31st of October. So whilst these two surprises do come as a welcome bonus, there is one change of emphasis coming in August that will make a big impact on things. Currently, 7.5 million people are on furlough, and that costs the government on a monthly basis around £14 billion. But this £14 billion doesn't factor in other government surplus packages. There are financial support packages for self-employed workers, there are business interruption loans for companies, 100% government guaranteed loans, VAT tax deferrals for businesses, bailout packages for larger organisations, huge investment in expanding the NHS, and various government grant programmes, just to name the more familiar outgoings. Suffice to say, the government spending at the current level is simply not sustainable. Something has to give. Currently on the furlough scheme, if you are on furlough, you cannot work for your employer. However, as of August, that's all to change. So the government's plan is for employers to bring back workers on a part-time basis, but split the bill for those employees' wages with the employer. Now, whilst this makes perfect sense, you might be thinking, well, why on earth didn't the government bring a scheme like this in sooner, or why are they announcing it as late as August? And there is a reason for this. Now, at the time of filming this video, already over 800 people have whistleblown on their employers for trying to make them work whilst on furlough. Now, you might be thinking, what, only 800? Didn't you just say a few moments ago that 7.5 million people were currently on furlough? Surely 800 is just a drop in the ocean, isn't it? But I'd argue a lot more people than 800 are actually involved in fraudulent claims. Think about it. Furlough only pays a maximum of £2,500 per month, which is £30,000 over a year. The problem with this is that employees who earn traditionally under £30,000 are not only taking the 20% hit on their salary, but a lot of the money they would have made under normal circumstances would have been made up on things like overtime, bonuses, commission. So they're not only missing out on the 20% of their salary because of being on furlough, but they're also missing out on a large proportion of overtime. How much that is differs from different people, but suffice to say, most people are taking more than a 20% hit. And remember, for those who are earning £30,000 or more, they're not only taking the 80% hit, but you've got to bear in mind that they can only get back £2,500 as a maximum per month. If they're on £50,000, trust me, they're taking a lot more than a 20% hit. And remember, furlough at any stage does not pay for overtime, bonus or commission. Sure, an employer can pay that if they wanted to, and they are also perfectly entitled to top up the 20% to bring it up to 100% of earnings for the employees, but most don't. So you've also got to consider it from the angle of many employers. They might still have some orders that need completing, some work that needs done, but they can't afford to pay employees full-time wages for what is essentially required part-time work. But with the option being either put them on furlough and then not have them doing any productivity at all, or bringing them on full-time and basically losing money for hours and wages that they just simply don't need done, it leaves them in a bit of a dilemma.
Fiddle faddle.
So whilst employees could do with a bit of extra money, employers could do with a bit of extra productivity, and this is where the problem comes into play. If you work on the quiet and your employer says to you, look, what I'll do is I'll pay your overtime cash in hand, you're getting extra money. But on the flip side of it, your employer is getting extra productivity. It works both ways. So it's as much in the interest of the employee to stay quiet as it is for the employer, obviously, to avoid declaring that they're committing fraud. So regardless of whether or not this is morally outrageous, it is fair to assume that there are a lot more cases of this kind of thing happening than the 800 or so that have been whistleblown. So going back to my earlier point on why the government haven't decided to bring part-time work, part-time furlough policy sooner than August, this begins to answer the question. On the current system, if they're working whilst on furlough, there are a number of ways of being able to detect it. Firstly, they might have sent some emails when they're not meant to be sending emails. They might have done a few transactions, signed for a few parcels. They might have their car in the car park and it might be seen in the workplace on the security camera. But when you allow workers to come back on a part-time basis, part-time furlough, the lines become blurred between when they're working and when they aren't. Clock-in times can be doctored, changes here, paperwork can be changed, all sorts of stuff. If they're there on the day they're meant to be furloughed but they're working part-time, you can change a few things around. It becomes a lot more difficult to isolate and prove any fraudulent activity has taken place. So let's give you an example. Let's say you actually worked for 40 hours in a week, but both you and your employer declared that you'd only worked for 25. The other 15 hours your employer claimed back from the government under the furlough scheme. Not only do they take that money back to cover for some of your wages, but let's say they even give you some of that money to keep you quiet. Why would they do that and what will be the benefit for you? Well, you're obviously going to make a little bit of extra money out of it, but you've got to also consider by accepting money that is effectively taken by fraud, you're therefore incriminating yourself, meaning that if you were to whistleblow and they were taken to court over it, you could be dragged into the same process. So regardless of your opinion on the furlough scheme, it seems pretty clear that fraud is already happening, and if my example is anything to go by, how it could happen in the coming months once those changes happen in August. The truth is, the government know this kind of stuff's going to happen. They're not silly. So they deliberately have left this quite late in the process to implement this, in my opinion, because they want to use it as more of a tool to get employees back to work. But do expect one comeback on it. Whilst it's great getting furlough money now and while the government is sticking by you, do bear in mind there's going to be some big tax hikes in the years to come. And whilst we all might moan at the government for this, I wouldn't just point the finger at them. Bear in mind that the amount of fraud that's happening not just from the furlough scheme, but the other schemes that are in place, misplaced loans, unofficial grants, self-employed people declaring for work that they haven't done when they've actually been working, all this stuff can and will happen. This is going to cost the government billions of pounds, and the taxpayer is going to have to pick up the bill. One final point I want to leave with you. A couple of days ago, it was Wednesday the 13th of May, and you might be thinking, is that a significant date? Well, it very well could be in the future. It was the day when the government said people could go back to work, but it was also the day that they gave a lot more freedom to people who've been locked down for the last 6 weeks or so. So all of a sudden, people have rejoiced in this. They've been allowed to go to the park, sunbathe for as long as they want, drive somewhere. They can even go to the beach all day. There are 7.5 million people currently on furlough, and it seems a given that many of those people are going to lose their job at the end of this. Companies are simply keeping on people on furlough so they can still pay their wages, look after their families. But many companies already know that they can't really sustain those people or keep them on when the government stops supporting the furlough scheme. And that means many of those people are going to lose their jobs. So whilst you may be enjoying the beach today, if you have seen some of your colleagues being asked to go back to work and you haven't, that could have serious ramifications for you in the months to come. So that pretty much sums up the video. Hopefully I've given you the updates and given you clarity and give you pause for thought. But if you like the video, encourage you to click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon so you won't miss any one of our forthcoming videos.